The first sound I remember from that day was not the organ music. Not the priest's voice. Not even the whispers of condolences. It was silence. A silence so thick, so suffocating, it pressed against my chest harder than the black dress I had forced myself into that morning. My husband was gone. That alone should have been enough to drown me. But in the hollowed-out corners of my heart, where grief carved deep, another weight sat heavy, something no one else in that church knew about. Something I had promised him I would keep hidden. $28 million. Yes, you heard me. On the very day my husband's body lay in a casket, every tear-streaked face turned toward me for sympathy. Yet only I carried the knowledge of a fortune that none of them knew existed. And not just that. I carried something else, something even more dangerous, sealed inside the envelope he had pressed into my hand just days before he slipped away. I sat in the front pew, fingers clutching the fabric of my dress, trying to appear composed. Inside, every second felt like a hammer striking steel. How do you mourn a man you loved while keeping your lips sealed about the storm to come? Faces blurred together in black and gray. Neighbors. Distant relatives. My husband's business associates whispering as though even death could not pause their deals. And then, my children. My son sat a few rows behind me, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, not red from tears, but sharp with calculation. I knew that look too well. He hadn't come to mourn. Had come to measure. To count what his father's death meant for him. Beside him, my daughter-in-law dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though not a tear had fallen. Always theatrical. I wondered if she was already imagining the vacations, the jewelry, the social media posts she could flaunt once the estate was divided. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the inheritance they expected to fight over wasn't the real treasure. That was hidden. Locked away. And the key? It was with me. The priest's voice droned on, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. My husband's coffin gleamed beneath the dim light, its polished wood a cruel reminder of finality. Yet even as prayers floated upward, I could almost hear his voice whispering in my ear, the way he had on the night before he died, "Don't tell them yet. Not until the time is right. Promise me." I had promised. But now, suffocating under that silence, I wondered, how long could I keep that promise before everything shattered? A hand touched my shoulder, Margaret, an old friend. Her lips moved in sympathy, but I barely registered her words. Because I felt it. A stare. From the far corner of the church, near the back pew, a man I didn't recognize sat rigid, eyes locked on me. Not on the coffin. Not on the priest. On me. His gaze was too steady, too deliberate. My stomach knotted. Who was he? A business partner of my husband's? A creditor? Or worse, someone who already knew about the 28 million? I forced myself to look forward again, breathing steady. But the question dug at me like claws, how much did people already know? How much longer could silence protect me? The service ended. Mourners filed past the coffin, some touching it tenderly, others barely sparing a glance. When it was my turn, my knees trembled, not from grief, but from the weight of responsibility pressing down. I touched the wood, cold and smooth beneath my fingertips, and whispered so softly no one else could hear, "I won't let them destroy what you left. I promise." Did anyone hear? I glanced sideways, paranoia prickling. My son's eyes flickered toward me, suspicion flashing there for just a second. Suspicion, or greed. At the cemetery, the air was sharper, colder. The ground was damp, mud clinging to shoes as the coffin lowered into the earth. My daughter-in-law clutched my son's arm, her display of fragility as practiced as a stage play. I kept my veil lowered, thoughts churning beneath the black fabric. I wanted to scream at them all, "You think you know what's coming? You don't. None of you do." Instead, I stayed silent. The soil hit the coffin, dull thud after dull thud. Each sound a drumbeat sealing fate. Each thud reminding me my husband had left more than grief, He had left me a burden that could ruin us all if I made one wrong move. That night, when the house emptied of mourners and only silence remained, I opened my nightstand drawer. Inside was the envelope. Cream-colored. Edges worn. His handwriting scrawled across it, "For you. Only when you're ready." My fingers trembled above it. Should I open it now? Should I wait? The silence pressed in again, the same silence from the church, the same silence from the grave. As if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for me to choose. I slid the envelope back into the drawer. Not yet. But I knew the truth. The moment I opened it, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. While everyone else thought my silence was about grief, about dignity, about mourning the man I loved. The truth was different. My silence was survival. And the question haunting me wasn't if they would find out. It was when. The air in the lawyer's office was nothing like the church. At the funeral, silence had pressed down like a heavy blanket, suffocating and slow. Here, the silence was sharp, brittle, like glass straining to shatter with the slightest touch. I sat at the long mahogany table, its polished surface reflecting the glow of the chandelier above. The faint scent of old paper and ink lingered in the air, mingling with the tension that coiled between us like smoke. My son and daughter-in-law were already there when I arrived, sitting close together. His face wore a mask of practiced grief, but his tapping fingers betrayed his impatience. Hers was too composed, too still, her lips curving in the faintest shadow of a smile, as though she could already feel the weight of jewelry on her wrists, hear the jingle of coins in her purse, taste wealth on her tongue. I knew, without needing to glimpse the documents in the lawyer's hands, what they were expecting. A feast. A fortune. A kingdom suddenly theirs. They thought the will was their golden door, their promised inheritance, the reward for simply waiting. But were they prepared for what was truly coming? Mr. Graham, the lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He was a small man, thin-framed, with the sort of patience that usually soothed. But even he seemed uneasy now, glancing at me as though he sensed I carried something heavier than grief. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "As executor of the late Mr. Lawson's estate, it is my duty to read his will and ensure his wishes are respected." His words dropped into the room like stones into deep water. Everyone leaned forward. Even I felt my pulse quicken, though I already knew, this was only the first act of a longer play. He unfolded the document with deliberate slowness, letting suspense coil tighter with each crinkle of paper. "I, Robert Lawson," he read, "being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The legal formalities blurred in my ears. My son's jaw tensed, his wife's fingers dug into his arm. Beneath my veil, I hid my eyes, but inside, I burned. Then came the words they were waiting for, "To my beloved wife, Eleanor, I leave." A pause. Pages rustled. My breath caught. The family home and its belongings, as well as the sum of $2 million, to be used at her discretion. The air shifted. I heard my daughter-in-law's sharp inhale, like someone struck. My son's brows shot up before quickly dropping again, his mask cracking for a moment. 2 million sounded vast, but not compared to the empire they believed was theirs. Mr. Graham continued, "To my son, Daniel, I leave." The room froze. Daniel leaned forward, every muscle drawn taut like a bowstring ready to snap. $500,000, in trust, to be used solely for his children's education and future. Security. Silence dropped like a guillotine. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his lips pressed into a tight, furious line. His wife's hand slipped from his arm, her eyes wide, darting between him and me as if reality had fractured. $500,000, not for him, not for her, but for children not even born yet. The first crack splintered through the glass silence. Mr. Graham cleared his throat nervously. "The remainder of Mr. Lawson's assets, holdings, and investments have already been distributed privately, according to his instructions." And that was it. The storm broke. Daniel's chair screeched back violently. This is a joke. His voice, once controlled, now burned hot. My father would never do this. Where's the rest? Where are the company shares, the offshore accounts? Don't tell me this is all. His wife's voice sharpened, slicing through the air like broken glass. 2 million for her? For you? After all these years, after everything we've done? Where's the rest? Her eyes, venomous and unblinking, turned on me. You knew. You knew all along, didn't you? I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Outside, calm. Inside, my pulse was thunder. What could I say? That there was more, hidden far beyond their reach? That my husband had entrusted me with the secret of $28 million, waiting in shadows? No. Not yet. Instead, I met her glare with a steady, quiet voice. Your father-in-law did what he thought was best. The answer only fanned Daniel's fury. His fist slammed the table, rattling the papers. Best? Best for who? He's dead, Mother. And if you think you can rule us with whatever scraps he left, you're mistaken. The words cut, sharp and deliberate. But I didn't flinch. Because what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly guess, was that I held the real power now. Mr. Graham interjected, voice tight. Mr. Lawson's wishes are final. Unless you plan to contest, the matter is settled. Contest. The word hung like smoke. I knew my son. Greed had eaten him hollow. Would he fight? This? Drag me through court? Dig into records, stumble across secrets meant to stay buried? A shiver crept down my spine. When the meeting ended, I rose quietly, but I felt eyes boring into me. Not just Daniel's burning glare, not just his wife's simmering hate. Someone else. By the window, tall, thin, silent. The man I'd noticed at the funeral. Dark eyes, unreadable, pretending to watch the street below, but his gaze was really fixed on me. Who was he? Why was he always there? The ride home was suffocating. Daniel's silence fumed like smoke. His wife whispered into her phone, believing I wasn't listening. Tension filled the car like an approaching storm. I stared out the window, my bag clutched to my lap. Inside, hidden beneath tissues and lipstick, was the envelope my husband had left me. Marked, for you. Only when you're ready. Was I ready now? The house felt cavernous when we returned. Daniel and his wife disappeared into the guest wing without a word, shadows trailing their anger. I locked myself in my room, hands trembling as I pulled out the envelope. For a long moment, I only stared at it, my husband's handwriting looping across the paper, almost alive. What lay inside? Instructions? A confession? A map to the hidden fortune? Or something darker still? I traced the seal with my fingertip, breath shallow. Then I froze. A sound slid under the door. A whisper. My daughter-in-law's voice. We need to find it. She's hiding something. I know she is. My chest tightened. Already, suspicion. Already, the hunt. I slipped the envelope back into its hiding place. My husband's words echoed in my head, not until you're ready. But when would that be? That night, lying awake, I counted every creak of the old house, every echoing footstep in the hall. My eyes traced cracks in the ceiling, my mind circling one terrible truth. How long before they discovered what I carried? Because silence wasn't safety anymore. It was a ticking clock. And soon, time would run out. The storm outside rattled the windows as though it wanted to come in. Rain lashed against the glass, branches whipped against the siding, and the trees bowed under the weight of the wind. It was the kind of night when even the walls seemed to shiver, when shadows lengthened and silence wasn't safe. I lay awake in bed, staring into the dark. The envelope in my bedside drawer seemed to thrum with its own pulse, louder than the storm itself. My husband's words echoed endlessly, only when you're ready. But ready for what? The truth? The danger? Or the battle I sensed creeping closer by the hour? Because I could feel it, danger was already inside these walls. It wasn't just my son's simmering anger or his wife's whispered suspicions anymore. No, this was something colder. Sharper. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. The faint groan of a floorboard, the creak of the staircase, the subtle shift of air in the hallway when no one should have been awake. The house was old, the storm was fierce, I could explain it away. But then, click. The unmistakable sound of a latch turning. Slowly. Carefully. My breath locked in my chest. Someone was inside. I slipped from the bed, bare feet soundless against the rug. Every instinct told me to stay hidden, but another voice whispered louder, find out. Don't let them steal what Robert left before you even know what it is. The hallway stretched before me, long and black, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning outside. A narrow beam of light moved along the wall, a flashlight, bobbing with steady steps. Too high for a child. Too careful to be my son. And then I saw him. A figure in black. Hood pulled low. Gloves covering his hands. He wasn't wandering. He was searching. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as he slipped into the study. The study. Why there? Unless he already knew. Unless he was after the envelope. My knees trembled, but I crept closer. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see the light sweep over shelves, drawers, the desk. Papers rustled. Wood scraped. He was tearing it apart. I wanted to cry out, to call for Daniel, to demand answers, but a thought froze me in place. What if it wasn't a stranger? What if it was my son, sneaking through the night for what he believed I was hiding? What if it was my daughter-in-law, prowling in shadows while pretending to sleep down the hall? I pressed a hand to my mouth, choking back a gasp. Then the intruder lifted his head, and the light skimmed across his jaw. Not Daniel. Not his wife. It was him. The tall, thin man from the funeral. The one with the dark, unreadable eyes. The one who had been watching me. He was in my house. My stomach lurched. Why was he here? How did he know where to look? I began to back away, praying the storm would mask the sound of my breathing. But then, crash. My elbow brushed a side table. A lamp toppled and shattered against the floor, exploding like a gunshot. The flashlight whipped around, blinding me. His eyes locked on mine, sharp, unflinching, predatory. For one frozen heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he bolted. He charged past me, down the stairs. Instinct propelled me after him, my voice finally breaking free. Stop. Who are you? What do you want? But my cries were swallowed by thunder as he flung open the back door and vanished into the storm. I collapsed against the wall, shaking. A door flew open behind me. Daniel stormed out, disheveled, with his wife trailing in a silk robe. What the hell is going on? He barked. There was someone, I stammered. A man, he was in the study, his wife gasped, clutching at her chest like a stage actress. Daniel's eyes narrowed, skeptical. In the house? Are you sure, Mother? Or did you just dream it? I saw him. My voice cracked. He's been following me, he was looking for something. For a split second, I caught it, a flicker in my daughter-in-law's expression. Not surprise. Not fear. Recognition. And then it was gone, replaced with feigned concern. Maybe you should rest, she whispered gently. All this grief, it's making you imagine things. Imagine? The broken lamp at my feet said otherwise. But arguing was useless. They didn't believe me, or worse, they wanted me to doubt myself. That night, I sat in the study, surrounded by the mess the intruder had left behind. Every shadow stretched too long. Every creak in the old house was a warning. The storm outside raged, but the real danger was here, in these walls. And one question gnawed at me, what had he been searching for? Because whatever it was, he hadn't found it. The envelope was still in my drawer. For now. By morning, my mind was made up. If I kept hiding the truth, others would uncover it. My son. His wife. Or that man with the dark eyes. And if they found it before I did. I couldn't bear to imagine. My hands trembled as I retrieved the envelope. The paper tore louder than thunder when I broke the seal. Inside, my husband's handwriting. Eleanor, it began. If you're reading this, it means the time has come. There are things I could not say aloud, things too dangerous. The fortune, the accounts, the inheritance, it isn't where anyone believes. And it isn't what anyone believes. I froze. My mouth went dry. There are enemies, Eleanor. Men who will stop at nothing to claim it. Even those you love may turn against you if they discover the truth. That's why I hid it. That's why I left clues only you can follow. Clues. The letter mentioned the key. A second ledger. The cabin in the woods. Notes fragmented, cryptic, as though even writing them had been perilous. But one line seared itself into my mind the moment I read it, trust no one, not even family. And if a man with dark eyes comes asking, run. Ice filled my veins. The intruder. The man my husband had predicted. He had known. He had expected him. I pressed the letter to my chest, my heart hammering so violently it hurt. What was the key? Where was the ledger? Which cabin? And, most terrifying of all, how much did my son and his wife already know? Because if the stranger was hunting for it, and my family was circling like wolves, then the truth was clear, the danger wasn't on its way. It was already here. And that storm outside? It was only the beginning. The reading room of the law office had gone silent, so silent that the ticking of the wall clock seemed to pound against my skull. Even the hum of the ceiling fan felt like a drumbeat of anticipation. My son, my daughter-in-law, and the lawyer sat across from me, their faces polished into masks of composure, but their eyes betrayed something sharper. Hunger. Expectation. Suspicion. They were waiting for me to speak. Waiting for me to unlock the one thing they couldn't pry open by themselves, the truth about the inheritance. But I didn't. Instead, I folded my hands neatly in my lap and let the silence bloom. It stretched like an elastic band, tighter and tighter, until I could almost hear it straining. I knew the power of silence. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was a weapon. It forced the greedy and the impatient to show their cracks. And cracks were what I needed. Mother, my son finally said, his voice clipped, rehearsed, almost brittle, don't you think this charade has gone on long enough? Father's gone. The accounts, the house, the business, it all needs to be transferred. If you're hiding something, it will only make things worse for you. Worse for me. The irony nearly made me laugh aloud. If only he knew how deep the rot ran. If only he knew that he wasn't the predator here, he was prey circling a trap he didn't even see. But I didn't laugh. I just let my gaze slide toward my daughter-in-law. She reclined elegantly in her chair, crimson nails tapping against the mahogany table, each click deliberate, each click a reminder that she wanted me to hurry. Her smile was calm, polite, perfectly rehearsed. But her eyes, oh, her eyes betrayed her. They flicked to the lawyer's folder for the briefest moment. Then darted back to me. Fear. Not curiosity. Fear. What was she afraid of? I leaned forward, my voice a whisper that forced them all to lean in closer. Do you know what he told me before he died? It was like striking a match in a dark room. Their reactions lit up instantly. My son stiffened, his jaw clenching so tight I could see the muscle twitch. My daughter-in-law froze mid-tap, her nails hovering just above the wood. Even the lawyer, who had tried so hard to remain impartial, shifted in his chair, his composure cracking with sudden curiosity. Perfect. But I didn't clarify. Not yet. Instead, I rose to my feet, smoothing down the black dress I still wore like armor. You'll find out soon enough, I said softly, almost kindly. Then I turned and walked out, leaving 3 stunned faces carved in disbelief behind me. That night, the house groaned under the weight of silence, each creak and sigh of the wooden beams echoing like whispers. Alone in my room, I opened the old oak chest at the foot of my bed. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust, of years layered with secrets. Beneath stacks of yellowed letters and fading photographs, my fingers brushed against something worn yet solid, my husband's leather-bound diary. Its edges were frayed, its spine cracked, its cover soft from years of being held. But what it contained was sharper than any blade. I turned to the last pages, written in shaky handwriting just weeks before his death. His words spilled across the page like a confession whispered in the dark. Not all of it is theirs, he had told me in those final moments, his lips trembling against my ear, his breath weak and rattling. They'll think it is. But you'll know better. At the time, I hadn't understood. Not all of what? The house? The companies? The money? But now, staring at the jagged words, the truth began to unravel before me. The $28 million inheritance wasn't the whole story. Hidden inside it was something else, a separate fund. A shadowed account in my name only. Something my husband had built, concealed, and sworn never to reveal to the children. Why? Why hide it from his own son? Unless, he didn't trust him. And if my husband hadn't trusted him, should I? The following evening, as I sat by the fireplace with the diary open across my lap, a knock shattered the stillness. Not a gentle knock. A pounding. Urgent. Desperate. When I opened the door, my son stood there, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes sharp with something caught between anger and fear. We need to talk, he said, pushing past me into the room before I could answer. Do we? I asked, closing the door behind him. Or do you just need to demand again? He ignored the jab. His gaze swept the room, searching as though he expected to find something hidden in the shadows. What did father say to you? His voice cracked with fury, but I heard it, the undercurrent of something else. Worry. What makes you think he said anything? I asked, calm as ice. Because his voice faltered, then hardened again. You looked at us differently in that office. You were too calm. Like you knew something we didn't. I leaned forward, my voice a whisper sharp as glass. Maybe I did. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush us both. His fists tightened, his knuckles white, his jaw trembling with contained rage. And behind the rage, fear. But fear of what? He left that night without another word, slamming the door so hard the walls quivered. But his words lingered in my mind long after he was gone. Too calm. Like you knew something we didn't. He was right. I did. And that knowledge was my only shield. But what happens when desperation drives him to strip that shield away? Days later, as I dusted the study, I accidentally knocked over the old brass lamp by the bookshelf. It crashed to the floor, the sound booming in the quiet house. When I bent to retrieve it, I froze. A hollow echo answered me from beneath the floorboards. My pulse quickened. Slowly, carefully, I pried open the warped planks. Inside the narrow cavity lay a yellowed envelope, brittle with time. My breath caught as I pulled it free. It was addressed to me. My husband's handwriting. Hands trembling, I unfolded the letter. If you're reading this, it means I am gone. Do not trust what they tell you about the inheritance. The accounts you see are only half the truth. The rest is hidden. Protect it. They must never know, or it will destroy them, and you. Destroy them. Destroy me. The words clung to my chest like chains. What was so dangerous it could unravel us all? The very next day, I was summoned back to the lawyer's office. He greeted me not with professionalism, but with unease. There's something you should know, he whispered, glancing toward the hallway before lowering his voice. Your daughter-in-law, she's been asking about accounts not listed in the paperwork. My blood ran cold. How would she know about those? I asked. The lawyer's eyes darted away. Somebody told her. Or she's been digging. Either way, she's looking for something your husband never meant for her to find. That night, I placed the diary and the hidden letter inside the oak chest, locking it with trembling hands. But sleep didn't come. My husband's warning echoed in the dark, protect it. They must never know. But how do you protect something that everyone is already circling like wolves? And then, as the first pale light of dawn crept across my bedroom, my heart turned to ice. The oak chest was no longer locked. And the diary, the one that contained his whispered truths, was gone. The chest stood open. The diary was gone. For a long moment, I just stared at the hollow space where it had been, my body frozen, my breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a scream. That diary wasn't just leather and ink. It was the fragile thread holding together every secret my husband had left me, his warnings, his confessions, his last words. Without it, I had nothing to prove the truth. But who had taken it? The possibilities stabbed at me one by one. My son. My daughter-in-law. Or maybe, someone else entirely? Someone I hadn't even considered yet. I gripped the side of the chest to steady myself. Whoever had it now didn't just hold paper, they held power. And if they'd already read it, if they knew what my husband whispered on his deathbed, then they didn't just have power. They had a weapon. And the weapon was pointed at me. That evening, I heard the unmistakable screech of tires tearing into the driveway. My pulse quickened. Then came the pounding on the porch, heavy, urgent, like fists trying to break through the wood. When I opened the door, my son stood there. His face was pale, his eyes wide and darting nervously. "Mother," he said, his voice lower than usual, a strained whisper, "we need to talk." I studied him carefully. His hands were jammed deep into his coat pockets, his jaw clenched and unclenched like a trap he couldn't control. "What about?" I asked. My voice was calm, but inside, my heart raced. He leaned in close, his words hot against the cold night air. "The diary. Where is it?" For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. So he didn't have it. Or, he wanted me to think he didn't. I narrowed my eyes. "Why would you ask me that?" His jaw tightened. "Because I know it exists. Father wasn't as careful as you think." I overheard him once, muttering about a record he was keeping. Something that would outlive him. "You've seen it, haven't you?" What should I have said? Should I confess that it was gone? Should I admit that I was vulnerable? Or should I lie? I chose the lie. "You're imagining things," I said softly. But my son's stare cut into me, sharp as a blade. He didn't believe me. He never would. Without warning, he stormed past me into the house, his shoes clattering against the wooden floor. He began rifling through drawers, cabinets, shelves, everywhere. "Where is it?" he shouted. I followed him, anger and fear tangling in my chest. "This is my house," I cried. "You can't just stop protecting him." He snapped, spinning toward me, his face flushed with rage. "Stop protecting a dead man's secrets." And then his voice dropped, low and venomous. "You think he left it all to you, don't you? You think he trusted you more than his own son. But maybe he knew you'd be the only one gullible enough to keep playing his games." The sting of his words burned me. But worse than the insult was the truth behind his tone. His anger wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And somehow, even without the diary in my possession, I still had it. And that terrified him. The very next morning, my daughter-in-law invited me to lunch. Unusual. She had never gone out of her way to see me unless my son was present. We sat in a sleek restaurant, glass windows stretching high above us, the clinking of silverware echoing in the background. She wore a lipstick too bold for daylight, a smile too forced to be genuine. "You know," she began, stirring her coffee with infuriating calm, "it's not healthy to keep secrets in a family." I stayed silent. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Especially secrets about money." Her eyes locked onto mine, cold and calculating. Then she said something that made my blood turn to ice. "I know about the other accounts." My fingers tightened against the edge of the table. "What accounts?" I asked, feigning confusion. She smirked. "Oh, come now. Don't play innocent. I've been digging. I found traces, small transfers, names I don't recognize. But they all connect back to him. And to you." The lawyer had warned me she was looking. I hadn't realized she was this close. I forced my face into composure. "Even if such accounts existed," I said carefully, "why would you assume they concern you?" Her smirk widened into a grin. "Because eventually, everything will. My husband is his only son. Which means what's his, is mine." Her words should have made me laugh. But instead, I felt the chill of threat curl around me like smoke. This wasn't boasting. This was a warning. Later that week, desperation drove me back to the lawyer's office. He closed the door behind us, his eyes carrying a weight I hadn't seen before. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said softly. "Something your husband asked me to withhold until now." My pulse hammered. "What is it?" He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside, a single sheet of paper. My husband's shaky signature scrawled at the bottom. An amendment. A secret clause to his will. And it changed everything. According to this clause, the $28 million wasn't simply divided or allocated. It was conditional. Bound by terms only I knew how to fulfill. But here was the twist: if I failed, the money wouldn't go to my son. It wouldn't go to his wife. It would go somewhere else. Somewhere they would never expect. The lawyer's voice was grave. He didn't trust them. That much is clear. But he didn't fully trust you either. He built this as a test. The word rang in my ears. A test. What kind of man designs a test that forces his family to devour one another? And worse, was I already failing it? That night, my son returned. But this time, he wasn't shouting. He wasn't raging. He was begging. "Please, Mother," he whispered, his voice breaking. His eyes were red, his hands trembling as though something inside him was splintering. "Just tell me what Father left you. Tell me what he said before he died." For a fleeting moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath his anger and greed, my son was still in there, the boy I had raised, the child who once ran to me with scraped knees and tearful eyes. But then I remembered the diary. The letter. The secret accounts. The look in my daughter-in-law's eyes. And I knew. If I gave him even a piece of the truth, he would use it against me. So I stayed silent. And once again, silence became my weapon. But silence has a cost. Because the next morning, when I came downstairs, the front door stood ajar. The air was sharp with the smell of rain. And on the floor, half hidden beneath the rug, lay a photograph. A photograph of my husband. Torn cleanly down the middle. I picked up the torn picture, my hands trembling. Someone had been in the house again. Someone wanted me to know they had been there. The diary was missing. The accounts were no longer secret. The will itself was a ticking time bomb. But the worst part wasn't what I found on the floor. The worst part was the look in my son's eyes last night. It hadn't been desperation. Not really. It had been something else. Something darker. Had my own child become my enemy? Or had he been one all along? The torn photograph lay in my trembling hands. Half of my husband's face stared back at me, his eyes frozen in that familiar, piercing way, as if he knew, even from beyond the grave, that this moment would come. Someone wanted me to feel hunted. Someone wanted me to know I wasn't safe. But who? Was it my son, desperate to claw his way into the fortune? My daughter-in-law, whose hunger for wealth was sharper than any knife? Or someone else, someone hidden in the shadows of my husband's secret life? I pressed the photograph flat against the table, as though restoring it would undo the fracture in my family. But the truth was undeniable, the fracture was already here, and it was widening. The next morning, the phone rang. Its shrill cry cut through the house like a blade. I lifted the receiver, expecting a neighbor or maybe one of Sarah's perfunctory check-ins. But the voice on the line froze me mid-breath. "Stop searching," the caller whispered. "Or you'll lose more than money." And then the line went dead. I stood there, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, my hands shaking. Whoever it was knew too much. They knew about the inheritance. They knew about the missing diary. They knew about me. But how? That's when I realized, this wasn't just about greed. This was about control. Power. The inheritance was the bait, yes, but the real secret? That was buried deeper. Somewhere I hadn't yet uncovered. 2 nights later, as I prepared for bed, something caught my eye on the nightstand. I froze. The diary. It had been returned. My hand shook as I opened it, flipping frantically through the familiar pages. But something was wrong. Entire sections were missing, pages ripped clean, sentences abruptly cut short, truth swallowed in silence. And there, between 2 surviving entries, was a note written in fresh, slanted ink: "He trusted me, not you." My blood turned to ice. Who wrote this? My son, trying to rattle me? My daughter-in-law, always circling like a predator? Or someone else entirely? The paranoia clawed at me. Was I fighting my family, or was I fighting a ghost my husband left behind? I couldn't bear the isolation anymore. So I called the lawyer and demanded an urgent meeting. When I arrived, my son and daughter-in-law were already there, seated across from each other, their faces masks of brittle civility. The lawyer placed a thick folder on the polished desk. "It's time you all know the truth," he said gravely. He opened the folder, revealing not one will but 2. The first, the one my son believed in, named him as the primary heir. But the second, sealed, witnessed, and valid, shifted everything. According to this second will, the fortune wasn't his. It wasn't mine either. It was locked in trust. For someone else. Who? My son demanded, his fist slamming the table. The lawyer's eyes flicked to me, then back to the folder. His voice was steady, but the words shook the room. "Your father left the estate to Ethan." For a moment, silence. Then the name detonated like an explosion. "Ethan?" I whispered. "My grandson. My son's boy. The only one who still looked at me with innocence, who asked questions too heavy for his years but still trusted my answers." "Yes," the lawyer confirmed. "Your husband made it clear, Ethan is the sole beneficiary. But only when he turns 21. Until then, the funds remain untouchable, managed by a guardian he appointed." I already feared the answer before I asked the question. "And who's the guardian?" The lawyer met my eyes. "You." The room erupted like a storm. "You're lying." My son roared, lunging across the table. "That's a fake. Father would never skip over his only son for a child." His wife sat frozen, her lips parted, her knuckles white against the armrest. But behind the shock, something flickered in her eyes: calculation. Even in chaos, she was already planning her next move. The lawyer pushed the will toward them. "It's real. Witnesses have signed. Any attempt to tamper with this will result in federal charges." But my son wasn't listening. He spun toward me, his face twisted with betrayal and rage. "You knew," he spat. "All this time, you knew, and you let me look like a fool." "I didn't know," I whispered. "Not until now." But he didn't hear me. Or maybe he didn't want to. In that instant, I saw it, the line that once tethered us as mother and son had snapped. He wasn't just angry. He was lost. To greed. To pride. To something darker. When the shouting finally subsided, my daughter-in-law leaned across the table, her words a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You can't protect him forever," she murmured. "You'll be gone before Ethan turns 21. And then? He'll meet someone else. Someone like me." Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were knives. She wasn't looking at Ethan as a child. She was looking at him as a vault, a fortune with legs. And she would stop at nothing to control it. That night, I returned home with the second will heavy in my purse. My heart was a battlefield, fear, dread, and the faintest thread of hope pulling against each other. On the kitchen table sat an envelope, sealed in handwriting I knew better than my own. My husband's. With shaking hands, I tore it open. "My love," it began, "if you are reading this, then the truth has come to light. I chose Ethan because he is still pure. He is the only one uncorrupted by greed. I trust you to guide him, to shield him until he is ready. This is not just an inheritance. It is a legacy. Protect it, and you protect him. Fail, and the wolves will devour him." Tears blurred the ink. Wolves. That's what my son and his wife had become. And I was the last wall standing between them and the boy they now saw as prey. Days passed in tense silence. My son no longer called. My daughter-in-law began sending Ethan lavish gifts, each one more extravagant than the last, an expensive watch, a gaming console, a designer jacket. They weren't gifts. They were bait, hooks disguised in wrapping paper. And then, one evening, I came home to find the front door wide open. Inside, chaos. Drawers overturned. Paper scattered like dead leaves across the floor. And there, in the center of the wreckage, lay the second will, torn in half. But that wasn't the worst part. On the dining table sat another note. This one written in handwriting I recognized all too well. "My sons. You've chosen your side. Now live with it." I sank into a chair, clutching the shredded pieces of the will. My husband's final words echoed in my head: protect Ethan. Protect the legacy. But how? My own son had declared war on me. My daughter-in-law circled closer every day, her ambition sharpening into hunger. And Ethan, the true heir, remained oblivious, a child standing on the edge of a battlefield he didn't even know existed. I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and whispered into the darkness, a vow sharp as steel: they think I'm weak. They think I'm old. But they've forgotten, wolves don't scare me. Not when I've got one last fight left in me. And deep down, I knew, this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning.